that, and thank you for your welcome. As I look at the date, I think, blimey. And I was saying it was 60 years, it wasn't. It's 61 years to a month since I stepped into a commentary box for the first time, and that was at Catalina Park, Katoomba. I've been around a long time, so as Jeff said, or sort of hinted, there's so many things to cover. I've owned 80 vehicles, and I've won 2, including the first one when I was at home injured from a rugby injury, still at school. I've worked for 2 car companies. I got into driving other people's vehicles when I was at Leyland, or BLMC, then Leyland Australia. We had a road test fleet, and I was always in one of those cars. Later, I was a year at Volvo, and likewise there. But then at later times, when I got hooked up a little bit with Channel 7, because I did 11 Bathursts for Channel 7, as I say, 1965 at Catalina Park, Katoomba. But amazingly, went on to do some stuff at Warwick Farm that same year. And there was a guy called Billy the Ziff Reynolds, Bill Reynolds, who was a speed car driver, but also road raced. He raced at Bathurst and other places. And he was commentating for Channel 7 at Bathurst in 64 and then 65. So Jeff Healy, H-E-A-L-Y, who was the tech director at Channel 7 that introduced in-car cameras to the world. It started at Channel 7 in Sydney, under Jeff Healy's guidance. They wanted to make him MD at Channel 7. He said no, he didn't want that. He just wanted to go on the tech side. And a lovely guy. And I remember at one Bathurst event, we had a colour monitor when the public was still on black and white, and they said, "Don't you bloody mention colour." See what you think of it. But Healy was looking for another commentator in 1965, the year I started. I'm a 23-year-old, I've been studying accountancy. Truthfully, I don't know where I'm going. In fact, here's one thing. In not knowing where I'm going, prior to 65, I'd been an accountant at Qantas, very modest job. And then I'd seen tube makers at Botany, was into computers and things, and they had a computer office there, and I thought, oh, that sounds like something I should learn about. So I went to tube makers at Botany, and you can imagine what in 1963, 4 or something, what the computer building was like and what the machinery was like. Absolutely. Went 24 hours a day. It was absolutely tightly temperature controlled. And there was a guy there among many programmers and things, and they used to do all the wages and simple things for the various companies in tube makers. And as I say, on 3 8-hour shifts a day. There was a guy who had been a bus conductor, and he'd done an aptitude test that discovered that he might have some aptitude, some ability to being a computer programmer. So he became a computer programmer. Now I can remember he had the elbows of his sports coat were worn out, so there were sort of holes there, but he was a very good programmer. Hans Tiedemann, if I remember correctly, his name. And one day he's arrived at work, a little bit at a different hour to what he normally arrived. "Hello Hans, how are you?" "Ah, that bloody car." He said, "It stopped on the way here. I've left it there in the gutter." I said, "What car?" said, "That's a Citroen." He got a Citroen in 1948, Light 15, ex the Malaysian High Commissioner. And it was absolutely immaculate. But in about a year, or a little bit less than a year, Hans had fixed up most panels on the car and generally mistreated it. Indeed, he'd sprung the passenger side door. It had been opened when it was going, and it had come back and then it wouldn't lock properly. And on one memorable occasion, when he and his missus had been out having a drink or three, the door sprang open, she fell out, and it took Hans about a block to discover she was still in the passenger seat. So anyway, he's parked this car, this Light 15, a bit banged about. And I said, "Well, he said, "I'm finished with it, I don't want it." I said, "You don't want it? Hans, talk to me, please." He said, "Oh, all right. So I got the Light 15 free of charge." He said, "Oh, by the way, if the police come round, tell them you got it from a bloke in the pub." And indeed the police did come round, and I told him what they were asking me about. He said, oh, that was something different. So that was the first of my Light 15s, of which I owned two, and I had another one partly at an earlier stage. But to go back earlier, in my early days, coming away from footy training down at Horden Oval near Lyne Park, Rose Bay, there was a little dead-end road there near Royal Sydney Golf Links. And I can remember on a couple of occasions leaving the sporting thing and heading out to get a bus home. And there was this wrinkled, curious-looking little car parked in that road, which I later learned was a deux chevaux. But for all the knowledge that I didn't have, we didn't have a clue. I and some mates, we looked at this thing, and as I say, corrugated panels and curious styling, all sorts of unusual things. We even ventured, do you think somebody made it themselves? But anyway, that was my first association with Citroen. A little while later, my stepfather, my father had died when I was quite young, and ultimately my mum hitched up and stepfather came along, and he'd been a wine and spirits salesman, but a very good salesman, and he became a car salesman. So when he got into my life, he was at Lark Hoskins on the left-hand side of William Street before the altered road section that they've got there now. And I can remember they had Austin Healey's in the showroom and Austin A60s and all that sort of thing. A little while later, he was working for Bill Buckle's father at Buckle Motors. And in William Street, they had 4 showrooms in the one block. Armstrong Siddeley, Citroen, Goliath, as the Germans called it, and one of the DeSoto or Dodge or whatever it was, one of the American ones. And when the DS came out in '55, or came available in Australia, they'd said to Tom, "You're not selling them, but you should be across these cars. They're really interesting, and there's a lot of interest in them. So take one this weekend." So we did, and we went to Katoomba. So 1956, thereabouts, I'm in a DS. And I'm not joking. We're going along, the roads are pretty modest in those days, and the 2-lane traffic on the Great Western Highway. And every car we passed just about, the heads went like this, looking at this thing that it looked like it had come from outer space. And we parked at Echo Point at Katoomba and went and looked at the Three Sisters, and did all the touristy things. And when we came back to the DS, we honestly had to excuse ourselves through a crowd of, it was about 4 deep around this car. They were just, well, they'd never seen anything like it. Who'd had a DS at that stage, you know? They were really new. So anyway, the stepdad got a bit enthused about all of this, and he brought home a deux chevaux one day to my parents' place. And I can remember him just driving straight head-on at gutters, up and down gutters, and doing all sorts of crazy things in this deux chevaux again. A very early model deux chevaux, to the extent that I remember clearly the speedometer was a circular bicycle type speedometer mounted on the dashboard. And it didn't have, as it wouldn't have had on a bicycle, it didn't have any illumination system. So up there on the rear vision mirror was an interior light, but also a cunningly focused light that went down onto the speedometer on the deux chevaux. So that was my second Citroen, well, no, third really, because I'd got a little while later got the Light 15 from Hans Tiedemann. So all of this went on. I probably road tested, stroke driven other people's 2,000 odd of other people's cars, car company cars. I'd go to a new car release, and we'd often drive 3, perhaps 4 or 5 different versions of that model. In fact, I can remember on one Holden drive, we were along the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. This, as I say, it was a Holden drive. And the drives became enthusiastic, let's say, in the way that we drove. And there were always people having little bits of races and various things. And we got to the luncheon spot, and we're all there dining and talking about the cars and how they'd handled and all the rest of it. When the Wallopers arrived, and they said, "We know what you've been doing, and don't keep on doing it. Just calm down, the whole bloody lot of you." But to go back to my early days, young Peter has been a wonderful lad, because there we have a picture, not of the exact car, which was my first car. That's a 1948 standard 8 horsepower Tourer. 4-speed gearbox, side valve engine, drum brakes all round, park brake worked on the rear. But it had been pedalled around Sydney promoting a Tony Withers show with a big banner on the side of it saying you could win this car. And I have that banner still at home, because this 1948 model, this was 1959, had been totally reconditioned by Marshall's Motors at Parramatta. It had check upholstery, it had a brand new hood, side curtains, wheels, tyres, all the rest of it. And on this Tony Withers show, they had, in each of 4 weeks, they picked 2 people who got the right time when they blew the horn for this competition. So ultimately 8 people went into a driving competition to win the standard Super Jalopy, as it was called. And I had the choice of, my stepfather could have got me into an Austin Lancer, a family friend had a Vanguard, which I could have borrowed, or I could have done it in the standard, and I didn't fancy that. So I did it in the Austin Lancer. But the thing that won me the competition, according to the police sergeant that went with each of us as we did our driving test, was that as we came off William Street, and I forget the name of the road just before the hill that goes up towards the museum there, and then you turn right past Beppy's and up this hill, and they got you to stop on the hill and reversed down. And I was the only one that put it in reverse, let the clutch out, and went down the hill. Everybody else was either in neutral or with their foot on the clutch or whatever, and that was what won me my first car. So life went on like this. Wandering on, as I say, in 1965, Jeff Healey is looking for another commentator, and he talks to GPF Sykes, Jeff Sykes, who incidentally had been a travelling marshal at Brooklands in England on a motorcycle in the 1930s before he came out to Australia to run Warwick Farm. A really interesting and a lovely bloke. And Healey was talking to him about commentators, and I'd been commentating with a lovely bloke called, I was going to say Jeff Healey. Heaven bloody help me. It'll come to me in a moment. It's crazy. It will come to me, but he was a muso who'd gone to England in about 55 on a musical thing, but with an interest in motorsport, and some of the Australians that were racing in Grand Prix motorcycle racing overseas had got to know him then. And in fact, people perhaps don't realise that in the mid-1950s, Australia had held 3 24-hour motor races, 2 for cars and 1 for motorbikes at Mount Druitt. And that was where this commentator started. Somebody was slogging away and got to about 6 or 7 hours in the commentary before he said, "Oh, can I have a break?" And dear oh me, you come to me. But anyway, Healey's talking to Jeff Sykes and said, "Who do you reckon we could have as a commentator?" And according to Mary Packard, this is interesting. I'm told by Neil Crompton a little while ago that Supercars employs about 100 people, roughly 50-50 Sydney and the Gold Coast office. Warwick Farm was run by 3 people, Jeff Sykes, John Stranger and Mary Packard. And Mary Packard reported that Jeff Sykes' answer to Jeff Healey was, "Young Will Hagon seemed to be showing a bit of promise." And so I'm sitting there working away as a clerk at Qantas at Mascot, and literally get a phone call saying, "Would you like to help us with our Channel 7 telecast this October?" Would I ever? So that happened. I don't know whether it was psychosomatic or not, but I ended up with a sort of a throat thing all through that, and I was swallowing stuff to get around that, but anyway, it seemed to survive. In what the commentary position was a seat there, and a seat there, and a television set there, and 5 steps up to the thing, canvas-covered commentary point. And so we did it in 65, and the next year I get a phone call saying, "Are you on again? Do you want to go? You want to do it again?" I said, "Oh, Jeff, that'd be terrific." I said, "But you haven't paid me for last year yet." And I have never told anybody what I was paid, but I'm embarrassed. But anyway, that was the way it went, and we did 11 of them, and ultimately, of course, we did the end of the London to Sydney Marathon in 1968. We went out to Warwick Farm. They let me out at Homestead Corner in case somebody stopped there. And indeed, somebody did, because they didn't want to go down to Creek Corner, which was the official finish of the run, if you like, before Andrew Cowan in the Hillman Hunter, who at that stage was leading the event. And as we know, it had been won by Lucian Bianchi and Jean-Claude Augier. Now Bianchi, imagine this. In 1968, he wasn't young, I think he was in his 30s. In 1968 in May, he had driven one of his Formula One Grand Prix in a Cooper, and he'd come third at Monaco. Next month, he'd gone off on another of his 24-hour Le Mans races, and he'd won Le Mans. And then blow me down, by December, he's leading the London to Sydney Marathon in a car that is very old by car standards. You know, it's an old model, it's been around for a long time. 68, came out in 55. And here's the sad part. Bianchi, if he'd won, would have been off doing some promotional stuff and all the rest of it. But he didn't win, obviously, so he's back to Le Mans next May. He's practicing for Le Mans, he had a crash and dies. So it was, and Augier, of course, a few years later, in an Ampol trial, will, oh, I know that bloke. Yeah, this was Channel 7. And we got to doing a number of things. Various race meetings we got into. In fact, when I was getting the head going, Keith Regan was the lovely commentator who, good morning ladies and gentlemen, welcome to wonderful Warwick Farm, were his opening lines for every meeting. He was just a wonderful guy to work with. So anyway, I've done that, and got to 1975, and at this stage I've had a lot of second-hand cars, but I've never had a new car. And at this stage, I was getting to the stage of being able to afford a new car. So I went to Citco, just off Parramatta Road, near the main entrance to Sydney University, to order a brand new Citroen CX 2200. This appealed to me in what I'd seen about it and heard about it and so on. In fact, I can remember being at a function. I don't know what the function was, but some sort of media thing to do with Bathurst or whatever. And I remember a guy from Mercedes-Benz said, "You're buying a Citroen?" He said, "We could get you a good discount on a Mercedes-Benz." Because back in those days, there was enormous sales tax and duty on imported vehicles. Cost me $5,000 to put the money down on this car, 5 of whatever, $75, where it was selling in Australia for over 12. So I actually ran one in England and then later in Australia for 3 years and sold it for 9, and I thought that's not a bad deal. I like that. But importantly, several things happened. I went to pick up the car, good gracious, and there, those were the hubcaps that I had just seen as part of the design that had won me over with this car. And I might say, prior to that, I was squiring a girl in Rose Bay Avenue, just opposite the entrance to the side entrance near the tuck shop to Cranbrook School. And Penny Cutner and her parents were good mates with Sir William Dobell. So one time visiting Penny Cutner, and I think it was number 7 Rose Bay Avenue, there is a Citroen parked in the driveway, and it's Sir William Dobell. They had little pictures of sketches that he'd done and work that he'd done on some of his stuff. And they had 2 vehicles. They had a Nash Rambler, which had that 2 colours plus an artificial wood-looking thing that they used to like back on station wagons back in those early days. And that was their sort of main vehicle. They loved it and they looked after it, and it gave them an enormous amount of trouble. And they had this very early model standard Vanguard, which they used to leave the doors open every night so the dogs could sleep in the seats. I mean, this was just a hack vehicle, and it never gave them an ounce of trouble. So anyway, I've ordered this thing, and my wife, who was at that stage, she was a medical researcher, and my concept of going to England, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd run a service station, and as I say, I'd worked for a couple of car companies. I'd organised the planning of, the setting up of the press release, where it would be and everything of the P76. And then later, as I say, some little time at Volvo. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so the concept was, I'm going to forget about Korea, I'll work at anything, and I'm going to chase as much motoring and motorsport as I can in England. So I wrote to the 3 organisations saying, I've done this, that and the other, can I help? And 2 of them said, thanks very much, no. And the 3rd one said, yes. Here are the tickets. Go and see Neville Hay down at Thruxton on this date in January. Now, by that time, I'd gone to pick this thing up, and my wife, as I say, was in medical research, and she organised to continue her career in England, doing medical research. She'd been at Sydney Uni here, under a guy called Professor Barry Firkin. Now, it was interesting. Down the bottom of Edgecliff Road, right down towards the water, before you turned left, and then you went left again into a little roundabout, and Barry Firkin lived there with his 6 children in a house that he called the Hog's Head. He called it the Hog's Head because 6 firkins make a hogshead. And he was a good lad, and he died at a young age, and my wife was very clever in medical research. However, the bloke that she contacted and was aligned to work with in London had been out literally a week or so before we left with walking his dogs. His dogs had sniffed something near a car. It was a bomb planted by the IRA, and it blew up and he was dead. So that sort of seemed to alter the plans a little bit, albeit that she got along and got in other things. But we're there, and the plot was, neither of us had been to Europe before, getting a new car. We'd go for 2 months, look at Europe, guided by the book Frommer's Europe on $10 a day. I had 2 children who were under 3. One was about 18 months and one was near to 3. We reckoned it wasn't obviously going to interrupt their kindergarten or anything, and we could get around with them. So we get to pick this up at Champ de Mars, and it's not ready, sir. But you could have this. So there was a Deux Chevaux, late 75, a 702cc Deux Chevaux, which I don't know what the sum was to use it. But all right, so we took this and we did 2 months in the Deux Chevaux, 6,000 Ks, and could have bought it for $2,000. But I already had the Citroen coming along, and I didn't know the government things. And I absolutely loved it. In fact, I was in northern Italy at one stage on packed snow, because this was November, December. And we're tootling along in the Deux Chevaux, which you could get to about 115. And I see in the rear vision mirror an Alfa Romeo catching me fairly quickly. So I keep well to my right, to the lower side, to the near side of the road, and it goes past. And I'm tootling along on my little Michelin radial tyres and in this funny little car with wonderful suspension and everything. And the Alfa comes up to the next corner on this packed snow, No, he's all busy braking and holding control. So the short of it was, the race, the contest, the competition between the Deux Chevaux and the Alpha went on for about 20 k's. And on one occasion I got past him. As he was getting perhaps 2 slow corners close together. Anyway, we get the CX, and in a sense life starts, because I got to go down to Thruxton to see Neville Hay, and Neville Hay was very smart. He lectured me about people from faraway countries like Australia who'd come over and fixed up the locals and treated them with contempt or not behaved appropriately. And they started this race meeting, which was a one-day race meeting. Practice, qualifying, racing, all on the day. The first race occurs, and one category was 1000cc sedans, Hillman Imps and all sorts of things, and it just, you know, vehicles of a spec and type that we'd never seen in Australia. So Neville Hay got fairly smart. I'd watched the first race. He said, "Would you like to do the next?" All right, so I did the next and survived, and I did it again later in the day. And from then on, Neville Hay, who later came to Bathurst through my involvement there, as also did his son later, Richard. And I ended up commentating at most English circuits, including a Formula 2 race meeting at Mallory Park, I think it was. I even did Knockhill Circuit in Scotland, where Terry Perkins, Larry's brother, was competing. And I said, in this wind-swept day in Scotland at Knockhill, and I said, and to all you Australians out there, you'll be pleased to know that Terry Perkins had just come up to second place, because there wasn't an Aussie within about 10,000 miles of the joint. But this went on. And with the delay in getting the CX, you had to have it out of Australia for 15 months to be let off the sales tax and duty. So that time went